If you love chocolate, this is for you. If you love hazelnut, this is for you. If you love chocolate and hazelnut, this is for you. If you want to look like a show-off, bring this to a dinner party. This stunning torte that looks like it's made in a pastry shop, this is for you. I mean, stunning. Today, I'm making a chocolate, pear, and hazelnut torte. I'm going to start by getting my ingredients and let's get to it. I'm wearing an awful lot of white for someone who is baking with chocolate, so if for no other reason, stay tuned to see at what point I regret this decision. All right, so I've got all of my ingredients here. The recipe is in the caption, so all of the exact measurements are there, but I just wanted to know a few things before we got started. One is that the egg whites are separated from the egg yolks, and the other is to preheat your oven before we get started. Mine's at 350 degrees. There were two parts of this recipe that felt fussy to me, and I will kind of apologize for in advance, but it is worth it. One is that I'm using both melted chocolate and cocoa powder. The other is that I am separating the whites from the yolks with the eggs. The whites will get whisked and folded into the batter later on, but I just want to tell you, I tried this recipe multiple times and it is worth it. The melted chocolate adds a fudginess that the cocoa powder does not add. So I think that having both of them in there really makes a difference. And the same goes for the eggs. Using the egg whites, and once they're whisked and you fold them into that batter, it adds an airiness that I think really makes a difference in the outcome. So apologies in advance, but you're welcome in advance, because also you're going to taste it and realize that it was completely worth it. So let's get started. I'm going to start by adding my unsalted butter. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but when baking, always use unsalted butter. The reason being, you are able to control the salt. We're going to add our own salt to this recipe, and by using unsalted butter, we can ensure that there's not too much salt. If you're working with two different brands of butter, the salt might be different in them. With unsalted butter, you always know that you are in control of how much salt is in your recipe. So, adding my butter to the bowl, and I'm going to melt this. This can either be melted on the stovetop and poured into the bowl, or I am just going to microwave it, and in the meantime, going to chop up my chocolate. While my butter is melting, I'm going to unwrap and chop my chocolate. Now what we want is to chop this as finely as we can, because once we add the butter to it and melt it, the finer the chocolate is, the easier it will be to melt. So I'm going to just give this a rough chop and then go back and finely chop it. Something you don't want to do is chop this and microwave it with the butter. Chocolate is a very, very temperamental ingredient. So if you were to microwave it until it melts, it can seize up, and you can overcook chocolate, believe it or not. So I'm just going to chop this as finely as possible. And once I add it to my melted butter, it will melt very fast. My butter is out of the microwave and melted. What I'm going to do is add my chopped chocolate right into there. Give it a stir and then let the butter do its job and melt the chocolate. If you've made a ganache, you're probably familiar with this. You pour the hot milk, in this case butter, over the chocolate and just let it sit for a few minutes versus constantly stirring it, because if you're stirring it, you're adding air into it and cooling it down versus letting it just sit and melt. The chocolate has melted and the mixture has cooled down a little bit. You don't want it to be too hot when you add your eggs in, because they will scramble. So give everything a few minutes to melt, cool down, and then on to the next step. I'm gonna set this aside for a minute and switch to a whisk. All right, here I'm adding in my egg yolks. This is Frangellico. It's a hazelnut liqueur, and there is alcohol in this, so I've also included a substitution if you want to use a hazelnut extract. Be my guest. It can be tricky to find in grocery stores, so order it online in advance, or you can use the Frangellico, which is found in most liquor stores. And then I'm going to add my milk. and both regular and brown sugar. Now we'll give this a stir until everything is combined. I'm going to set this aside, and then here I have my egg whites. What I'm going to do is whip these to stiff peaks, and then we'll add in our flour and those ingredients, and then we're going to whip in our egg whites. So you can use a handheld mixer. I mean, if you're brave and want an arm workout, you can certainly do it by hand and beat these till stiff peaks. Once you incorporate the air into the egg, you're going to see a big difference in both the volume and the paleness. Right now, the egg whites are translucent and there's not any volume. What you can also do, it helps them whisk a little better, is just a pinch of the salt that you are going to use in the recipe. And just let it rip. Look at the difference in the volume of the egg whites. What this is going to do is add some lift to the cake along with the baking powder that we're adding and make it much lighter and airier. Okay, let's see. See, it's not a stiff peak yet. It's not even really sticking to the whisk attachment. So just a few minutes longer. Okay, our egg whites are done. In this bowl, I have my all-purpose flour, and I'm going to add to it my hazelnut flour or ground hazelnuts, my baking powder, salt, and cocoa powder. And I'm just going to give this a stir because I want to incorporate it all before adding it to my batter. You don't want like a pocket of baking powder or salt to not be properly incorporated into the batter. So I really think that mixing your dry ingredients together beforehand makes a big difference. And I'm going to switch back to my rubber spatula. What I want to do is make sure this is mixed together as well as possible before we add our egg whites, because when we add our egg whites, we want to be very delicate when we're stirring. We don't want to add the egg whites and then aggressively stir it and lose all of the air that we just took that time to incorporate into them. So we're going to gently fold the egg whites in, and the batter is ready to go. Here I have my egg whites. I'm going to do about half. Gently fold them in. And if you don't know what folding is, watch Schitt's Creek. We want to make sure there's no white streaks left, but that it adds that lightness and airiness to the batter. All right, now I'm going to go back for the rest of my egg whites. I'm going to show you how I use parchment paper in a springform pan. I've seen where people fold it in like a million triangles and it fits perfectly. This to me is so much easier. I take the bottom of my springform pan, I put the parchment paper on top, place the ring around it. All you do is cut off the overhang. Voila. Now I'm going to grease this and get my hazelnuts and pear. Here I have hazelnuts, and you can certainly chop them, but I find that they run all over the cutting board. So for me, the easiest way is to take a mallet, the hazelnuts in a sandwich bag, and just give them a quick whack. There you go. This recipe only takes one pear. So what you're going to do is just cut it into quarters, core it, and then thinly slice it. You don't want your pear slices to be too thick because then they won't soften and bake properly while you're baking your torte. So I would say probably 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch thick. And keep those 4 segments separately, because what you'll do is fan them out onto the torte before baking. I'll set these aside, and I'm going to pour my batter into the baking pan. This is a 9-inch springform pan. If you use a 10-inch springform pan, then it will be a less tall cake and it will require less baking time. So you might have to play around with that. For best results, use a 9-inch. The batter is in, and I'm going to just even this out. Now I'm going to sprinkle the hazelnuts over the top of it first. These not only tell you a little bit about what is inside the cake, but they add such a nice crunchy element. Honestly, who does not love the combination of chocolate and hazelnut? It is like one of the best. Here I have one of the 4 segments of pear. I'm going to fan this out and just place it right on top of the batter. No real rhyme or reason. Feel free to get creative with your design. Now, time to pop this into the oven. It's time to give our dessert a taste. Getting the texture right on this was so important to me. I didn't want it too cakey, too fudgy, too dense. It had to be just right. Okay, final thoughts. The texture on this is just right. It's like a mix between a brownie and cake. It's fudgy like a brownie, but it's tender like cake. The hazelnuts on top are a little bit of an added crunch, and they obviously tie in with the hazelnut flour in there and the hazelnut liqueur. Overall, this does not disappoint.